I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I am Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, April 25th, 2024. The time is 10:08 in the morning. This hearing is being held in room 412 of the Johnny Wilson Building, although some of the witnesses may be participating virtually. The subject of this hearing, this is the fifth of 6 hearings that the Committee of the Whole is having on the agencies under the direct purview of the Committee of the Whole with regard to the budget for fiscal year 2025 that the mayor has proposed. The mayor sent her proposed budget for fiscal year 2025 and revisions to the FY24 budget. A couple weeks late, we received it on April 2nd. All of the council committees are having hearings this month on the proposed budgets for agencies under their purview. The committees will be marking up the week that ends May 10th. I think that means it starts May 5th or May 6th. That'll be the committee markups. The full Committee of the Whole will make its recommendation to the council on May 29th, when we'll have first reading on the budget. Second reading will be June 12th. There are 4 bills that the mayor submitted that comprise the budget proposal for fiscal year 25. It's the revised budget for fiscal year 24, which is, I believe, called the supplemental fiscal year 2024 supplemental budget. The budget for 2025, which is the Local Budget Act, the Budget Support Act, which is legislation to support the budget, the Federal Portion Budget Request Act. Committee of the Whole will have a hearing on those measures, not specific agencies, but on those measures. Overall, that hearing will be on May 3rd, beginning at 9:30 in the morning. Testimony by witnesses will be limited to 3 minutes, that hearing, because we expect a large number of witnesses. The agencies that we're considering today are, the budgets for agencies that we're considering today are for, and in this order, the Council of the District of Columbia, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the District of Columbia Auditor, the Office of Budget and Planning, and the New Columbia Statehood Commission. And as I said, we'll be hearing it in that order. Tomorrow, the Committee of the Whole will have its 6th and final hearing, where we will hear testimony regarding the proposed budgets for the District of Columbia Retirement Board, the other post-employment benefits program, and the Commission on Arts and Humanities. That's tomorrow, beginning at 9 o'clock. With that, we will begin with the Council of the District of Columbia. And I have 3 witnesses before I get to the agency representative. And they are Maria Elena Anderson, who's with Latino Seniors of DC, Eric Goulet, who's the Ward 3 representative to the State Board of Education, Hillary Kay, who is with Disorder the Play, blogspot.com. Let's see who's here. Mr. Goulet, you'll go first, and then Hillary Kay.
Thank you very much,
Good morning.
Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and staff of the Committee of the Whole. My name is Eric Goulet, Ward 3 representative for the DC State Board of Education. Today, I will be testifying in my individual capacity as a board member and not on behalf of the board. I support the Council of the District of Columbia's fiscal year 2025 operating budget request of $34,449,308, supporting 227 FTEs. Despite its recent challenges, the Council has a rich history of being a leader on transparency and fiscal issues, and I'm hopeful that these funds will get the DC Council back on track. I will be testifying later today in support of the Office of Budget and Planning's operating budget of $6.7 million. When you add these budgets together, Mr. Chairman, it only totals $41.2 million. And yet I have 6 minutes total to speak on these agencies today. However, for the budgets of DCPS, the Deputy Mayor for Education, the Office of the State Superintendent for Education, non-public tuition, and special education transportation, which total $2.2 billion, you allowed members of the public to speak for just 3 minutes total. In the proposed fiscal year 25 budget, these education agencies and programs face a myriad of complex and important issues, including devastating cuts to the buying power of our local schools across our city, which I was very appreciative that you resolved to fix at the recent Ward 3 Democrats meeting and in your newsletter. Inadequate funding for capital modernizations like MacArthur High School and Stoddard Elementary School, and elimination of the OSSI Child Care Pay Equity Fund, narrowing staffing margins in OSSI, Special Education Transportation, as the program is being sued to be brought back into court receivership, and a DME boundary study and master facilities plan that make little progress on resolving issues like Ward 3 school overcrowding, fulfilling commitments on universal pre-K education, and expanding inclusive special education services within DCPS. At one point, 486 public witnesses had signed up to testify, but many were disenfranchised because of the unreasonable length of the witness list. Mr. Chairman, please stop putting public testimony for 3 of the most important public education agencies on the same day. There is simply no justification for doing this, and if you do not have time to devote to holding these hearings in an adequate manner, then please recreate a standalone education committee in 2025 for Council period 26. The public was also forced to testify just 2 days after the release of the mayor's proposed FY25 budget and just 23 hours after the release of the proposed individual DCPS budgets. I've testified for 2 consecutive years about the need to shift the budget process 5 weeks later, requiring the chancellor to submit the initial school budgets before the CFO's February revenue estimate forces unnecessary conservatism. I urge you to modernize the budget submission timeline to allow the chancellor to submit initial school budgets 2 weeks after the February revenue estimate and give LSATs a full 2 weeks to petition for changes. This schedule would still give Council its full 70 days for budget approval, plus an additional week to approve the Budget Support Act before Council summer recess. Lastly, the Schools First in Budgeting Act continues to create confusion. At the performance oversight hearing, I encouraged you to reach out to the Attorney General, Brian Schwab, to request an independent legal opinion if you truly believe the law is legally sufficient, as you've done for 2 other legal matters in the last 6 months. While I support the spirit of the Schools First in Budgeting Act, it clearly violates the DC Home Rule Act and principles of constitutional separation of powers and isn't a valid law. The mayor has repealed this law in her Budget Support Act, and I would encourage you to leave it repealed. That concludes my testimony for today, Mr. Chairman, for this agency, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goulet. Hillary Kay?
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for allowing me to testify today. This year, more than ever, we are looking to save money, and you, the committee of the whole, overseeing the entire DC Council, and you, the entire DC Council, by filling an egregious service gap in one agency, can save significant taxpayer money across the agencies. The witnesses are coming all the time before your committees with requests not to cut programs and to give money to programs. This testimony proposes something offering significant cost savings. Yes, we're asking for a small investment, $50,000 for DBH to train stakeholders, but that relatively small investment will offset significantly higher cost savings across the DC government. Now, if you today are considering how to budget for the council itself, let's put a little money into having the DC Council coordinate between all the disparate agencies and committees of the DC Council involved in trying to make a small investment now for a large payoff. The behavioral health diagnosis, defined as hoarding disorder, or HD, directly represents a DC Department of Behavioral Health severe service gap and unmet need for early intervention that costs FEMS, APS, Medicaid, as well as district residents, both in dollars and in life and limb. I've testified before multiple committees of this council with purview over even more numerous different agencies, but you, the committee of the whole, overseeing the function of you, the entire DC Council, can take action that with an ounce of prevention will render great weight and lots of pounds of dollars worth of cure across agency, but it's going to require the whole council to work together and require disparate agencies of the executive branch to work together to realize these savings. So a little coordination is what I'm asking for today. Hoarding disorder, as I have testified in other hearings, or otherwise known as HD, is a severe egregious service gap in the Department of Behavioral Health. I've testified at the Committee on Health for a decade now. I've testified for the committee overseeing FEMS. I've testified for the committee of executive administration and labor because of adult protective services. People who call DBH get bounced around from agency to agency, and it ends up costing a lot because these are extreme emergency crisis triage interventions after years and years and years of going untreated. Why? Stigma, shame, and judgment, it still exists. The Washington Post had an article that I'll put in the written testimony estimating up to 6% of people living with hoarding disorder. That's 40,000 residents of the District of Columbia. I am grateful that people with Alzheimer's are getting care, but they represent 2% of the population. If we acted about Alzheimer's the way we act about the diagnosis defined clinically as hoarding disorder, oh, that person has dementia. Oh, let's just look the other way. Oh, that poor family. Oh, isn't that awful? But that's how people think about hoarding disorder. That's a block to getting care. We need to shine light into the clutter closet. It's also a relatively new diagnosis. It's been defined by the American Psychiatric Association for over a decade, but there's also not that many people that know what to do. So what are we going to do? Just sweep it under the rug because we don't really know what to do about it? I think better of this council and this city than that. So, and there's, I also in the written testimony, there's an article about firefighters and the significant cost increases. So we need coordination. The DC Council needs to make this happen. It will save money because it is penny wise and dollar foolish not to make a small investment now that will pay off in dollars, in quality of life for residents. People won't get put into guardianship and sent to nursing home because of an untreated behavioral health condition that lacked early intervention and harm reduction, not to mention life and limb of our first responders. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. It was very difficult to understand you. I think there was some issues with the audio at your end. It would be helpful if we had a copy of your statement. Can you provide that, please?
Yes, sir, I will. Thank you very much.
Okay, because then we can review it more carefully. Thank you. I don't have any other questions for you, Mr. Goulet. I don't have any questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. Nash Smith. When you're ready, good to see you. We don't need to swear you in, do we?
Say that again.
Please proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson, members of the council. I am Nyasha Smith, Secretary to the Council, and I respectfully submit testimony on the fiscal year 2025 budget for the Council of the District of Columbia. The proposed operating budget for next fiscal year for the council is $34,449,308 and 227 authorized FTE positions. The most significant highlights for the upcoming fiscal year include funds for the council's 3% retirement match, an allocation for the council's student loan repayment program, adequate funding to support the council's standing committees, a slight decreased fringe assessment from 25.1% last fiscal year to 24.7% in FY 2025. Funding to support the maintenance and regular improvements of our newly launched hearing management system, or HMS, which is a central hearings and testimony portal that's accessible to the public. And finally, dedicated funding for employee professional development. The budget as proposed reflects a slight increase of 1.5%. This increase is wholly the result of the aforementioned Employee Professional Development Initiative. All other aspects of the budget remain unchanged. The council continues to invest in our people, with 90.9% of our budget allocated to PS spending in FY25 and 91.5% actual PS spending this fiscal year. As I've done previously, Mr. Chairman, I continue to advocate for additional PS funding for increased salaries, as well as the continued hybrid work model for our employees. As the country continues to progress post-pandemic, nationally, we're seeing a shift in the workforce as employees are seeking employers who, quote unquote, are investing in their employees' success rather than simply providing benefits. Remote and hybrid work options, benefits that reflect environmentally sustainable practices and values, positions that promote professional growth and development remain determining factors in employment decisions. Nurturing a culture that is based on these values will be our strongest asset in our ability to remain competitive in the workforce. Our ability to effectively continue our mission will rest on our ability to attract and, more importantly, retain highly qualified and motivated employees. And this budget proposal takes a step in the right direction. In addition to the council's operating budget, the council also administers the budget for the Paper Agency Uniform Law Commission, which was statutorily designated over a decade ago. The paper agency was established for the sole purpose of paying the district's annual dues to the Uniform Law Commission and any travel-related expenses associated with commissioners attending the annual meeting. The budget for the agency for the upcoming fiscal year is $65,000. Before I wrap up, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the 206 council employees for their continued dedication and hard work. I ask that you act favorably on this budget request, and I'm available for one question.
What was that?
Just one.
All right, well, it'll be a run-on question. So the budget for the council is going up, is proposed to go up by $500,000.
Correct.
And that's split roughly equally between personnel and non-personnel.
Actually, no. The $500,000 increase is actually all personnel.
Did you know the budget book says $255,000 increase in NPS?
It's an actual increase of $500,000 for PS.
All right, so we need to fix that when we mark up the budget.
Sure.
And the budget office knows this?
I am not sure, but I'll make sure to let them know.
Okay. And the primary driver for PS going up is salary increases? It's not an increase, yeah, it isn't a slight increase in authorized FTEs.
So there is a slight increase. There's an increase of 4 FTEs for next fiscal year. So that's part of the cost driver. The other part is the professional development initiative, which designates $1,000 per employee next fiscal year for professional development opportunities.
Per FTE, so does that include council members? Council members will get professional development
Actually it does.
or counseling? Do you know offhand how many employees are participating in the retirement match program?
Yes, I do. If you give me one moment. So for FY23, the actual amount was 144 employees. For FY24, thus far, it's 236 employees. Now, let me just take a moment to explain that number. It's 236 for the entire year. So that includes folks that have separated from the council.
Can you speak to the participation in the student loan repayment program?
So the number of employees that are eligible for the tuition reimbursement program seems to be constant. It's about 30 every year. So for FY23, the actual number was 26, and for FY24, it's 25. We do offer a program. You must be employed for 1 year at the council and must have an eligible student loan that is in the employee's name. So we have seen just about 30 since the program has started.
The fringe, which you note has decreased slightly, that's a number that's given you by the CFO.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's a number that's determined by the CFO annually, and it's based on the 3 years prior average cost to offer our employees benefits.
It's not a number that we can argue.
No, it's not.
The, if there are about 206 right now employees at the council, and we're authorized for around 226,
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
are most of those vacancies in council members' offices?
Yes. And it's almost like a rolling vacancy. As we get some filled, then we lose people. So it seems to be a number that's on a rolling basis, but the majority, if not all, are in council member offices.
Give me a second. But did not mention Metro. There's a Metro subsidy for employees as well. What is that match like?
So, Mr. Chairman, we offer a Metro subsidy of up to $100 per month per employee for travel to and from work. And employees that do not receive parking are eligible for the Metro Transit subsidy. In FY23, our utilization was $38,000. And thus far in FY24, we are at $24,000.
24, you said?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So that looks like we're on track to exceed last year.
Yes. I think now that employees are coming in a little bit more often, we're probably closer to what we were pre-pandemic. So the budget for this initiative is 50,000. So we are on track and will probably exceed last year's numbers.
I do not have any other questions, but would you touch base with the budget office so that so that the council's budget is reflected accurately?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
That's going to conclude the testimony regarding the Council of the District of Columbia. We will turn to the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. We have an ANC commissioner before we turn to Mr. Mercer Santiago Lacatos, who does not appear to be here. So Mr. Mercer, you're up.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson. My name is Clark Mercer. I'm the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, also known regionally as COG. And today I'm pleased to discuss the district's fiscal year 25 budgeting for COG programs and the services that COG provides. And bottom line up front, the previous fiscal year, and this will be similar for this coming year, the main funds, COG membership dues, the Public Safety Fund, Environmental Fund, the Farm Fund, and the Anacostia Watershed Restoration Program. Those funds that the district pays to COG come in at a little above 900,000, 905,000. In total, in fiscal year 23, spread between a variety of programs in transportation, public safety, and homeland security and environmental, there was a little under $15 million worth of programs that we ran in conjunction or on behalf of the district, much of that being federal pass-throughs from the federal government through COG to the district. As you and many of the folks listening know, COG's membership is made up of the region's local and state elected officials and members of the area's congressional delegation. These members serve on a network of boards, policy committees, and partnerships. COG has three major boards. That's the COG Board of Directors, the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board, known as TPB, and the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee. Our policy and advisory committees are the Climate, Energy, and Environment Committee, Chesapeake Bay and Water Resources, Human Services, Region Forward Coalition, and the newly founded Food and Agricultural Regional Member Committee. And this serves as think tanks for the boards. COG also supports public-private partnership groups, including Commuter Connections and Clean Air Partners. And we convene many professional and technical committees of local officials, such as the chief administrative officers, the fire chiefs, CIOs, planning directors, housing directors, and the newly organized chief equity officers. COG is supported by financial contributions from federal and state grants and contracts, its member governments, and donations from foundations and the private sector. COG member dues and regional fees are based on a per capita rate established on an annual basis by the board of directors. And generally, the per capita rate is based on a forecast of general operating expenses and federal funding match requirements and has seen a slight increase annually. The district annually dedicates budget funds for COG membership dues, the Public Safety Fund, Environmental Fund, and the Food and Agriculture Fund. For every $1 in member dues, the region receives more than $8 in direct federal funding for transportation planning and homeland security staff support. Member dues also provide primary program support, leverage additional resources organization-wide, and provide funding for member services, benefits, outreach, and regional forums. District also participates in COG's regional programs, including the Anacostia Watershed Restoration Program, Clean Air Partners, Street Smart campaigns for pedestrian roadway safety, and regional public safety projects, including automated fingerprint identification system, geospatial data exchange, license plate readers, and identify and access management systems to enable our public safety agencies to work together across state lines. Much of this information was provided in background documents at the performance oversight hearing, and I'm happy to elaborate on any of these issues that you may be interested in. The district also annually pays COG federal funding dollars that the district passes through to our organization to administer programs, including federally designated transportation planning and regional transportation programs, the Homeland Security Executive Committee, and support of regional Homeland Security projects, and stream restoration monitoring. The FY25 budget work program and budget will focus on sustaining core programs and enhancing the value of membership at COG. Also highlights various initiatives where COG has demonstrated a cross-cutting approach through its subject areas and departments to support meeting regional climate goals, advancing racial equity within our programming and committees, and continue to coordinate land use and transportation planning through Visualize 2045 and transit-oriented communities. Thank you for the opportunity to summarize our work that we do on behalf of the District of Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer. The mayor's proposed budget is $1,097,033. That's dues plus the other commitments like farm. Does that sound right?
That's right. That's the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5 different fund programs that you pay into. So it's the COG membership dues, the Public Safety Fund, Environmental Fund, the Farm Fund, and the Anacostia Watershed Restoration Program.
I wrote down membership, public safety, farm, Anacostia restoration, and what was the fifth one?
Environmental Fund.
And the amount is proposed is a little less $180,000 less than the FY24. Why is that?
The membership dues are based on population estimates, and the districts decreased from FY24 to 25. I think that would be the largest driver of why there's a decrease.
According to the mayor's budget, or the budget book that we got, the budget includes $353,000 one-time increase to support membership dues. Do you know why it's one time?
I don't know why it's one time. The Transportation Planning Board, for the first time in many generations, the Biden administration increased funding for MPOs across the country, $2 million a year, and there's a 10% match, 200,000. So there's an increase in member dues that's largely tied to that, above and beyond, the normal increases that we would have year over year. The expectation is that funding from the federal government's going to be permanent moving forward, and that would be ongoing funding, but I can check why it would be designated
Yeah.
one time versus ongoing.
Yeah. So we should look at the 1,097,000 as recurring, not one time. That total.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I'll double check, but I mean, our dues and that are paid are ongoing, we hope.
I had a question about the agricultural regional member program, but
Mm.
I think you answered that's included in the 1,097,000.
Yes, the farm fund
Yeah.
FY25 is just shy of 38,000.
And last year, 2 years ago, the regional public safety programs was new, but that's sounds like that's now recurring.
Yeah, the public safety fund, the chart that I have has dues from FY21 through 25.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was before that, but what I have in front of me is that starting in FY21, it was 72,000. It's increased slightly each year, and it's at 79,000 for FY25.
It sounds like you've got a chart for each of these dues. Farm, public safety.
I do. This was in March when we testified to the performance oversight hearing, and I will resend this and the follow-up questions you had then, provide a
would be
further
great.
breakdown.
That would be great.
Okay.
I don't have any other questions for you.
No, sir. Thank you.
I think the only issue that I have is to make sure that this is recurring in our financial plan. We adopt a one-year budget, but then we have a 4-year financial plan.
Yes, sir.
4 years, right? 5, 1 + 4, for a total of 5. So we have to straighten that out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer. We're going to give me just a second, and then we'll turn to the District of Columbia Auditor. I have 2 witnesses before the auditor, David Maloff, who I'm assuming is online, and Scott Goldstein, who's in person. Give me a moment before I call you, but you can come forward. Mr. Goldstein, you're it. And since I limit testimony to 3 minutes when there are a lot of witnesses,
Quiet.
it's pretty quiet, so you can have a little bit longer. I won't say
I
how
won't
long,
need much more.
but if I fall off my stool, that means you've gone too long.
Okay, sounds good. Good morning, Chairman Mendelson, staff. We need the Office of the DC Auditor to be fully staffed and fully resourced to do more in the area of education. In a system of mayoral control of schools, it's even more critical that independent bodies like the auditor can routinely look into school policies and practices. I'm glad DC now has an active research practice partnership. I thank you for getting that work off the ground and look forward to their work. But they will largely be taking on one issue at a time and do not perform the same type of auditing function. We have many pressing issues facing the education sector that need immediate independent review. I'm here to suggest the auditor consider 3 areas of study. First, we're overdue for a new report on PARA, the Public Education Reform Amendment Act. That follows up on the Office of the DC Auditor's 2015 report and recommendations. Their last published update on this report was in 2016, 8 years ago. The council pledged that it would review PARA every 5 years after passage, yet despite 17 years passing, only one official review has been conducted, authorized by the government. The State Board of Education's report on education governance last year, along with many other expert reviews, have made clear the urgency of reviewing and revising our system of education governance. Especially in a tight budget year, you would hope the council would recognize that with money tight, we have to crack down on ineffective and wasteful programs. Outright mayoral control has produced monumental waste in the system and delays in writing the course once spotted, often by journalists and advocates rather than elected leaders. We urge the auditor to take on oversight here with a new report. Second, we encourage the auditor to study student engagement and attendance. The conversation on attendance we've had as a city in recent months has been overly technocratic, focused on reporting requirements, referrals, and data processes. While these are important changes to be made there, very little of the legislation currently proposed gets at the root cause of high chronic absenteeism, from poverty to a lack of student engagement and the relevance of curriculum. We also waste enormous amounts of time and money on ineffective attendance interventions like incentive programs. I believe the auditor could do an effective job studying what works and what doesn't and guiding us towards better solutions. Third, we implore the auditor to take on the work of studying the very troubling experience gap students face depending on where they go to school and the private financial resources and support available outside formal funding. Parent involvement in PTO funding, as well as efforts to bring in private dollars, produces an experience chasm for many students. In some schools and some parts of the city, field trips and experiential learning are regular occurrences. Arts and theater are critical parts of the school's community. Outdoor space and recess is plentiful. Students have access to internships. Outside experts routinely visit class as guests. Students have access to study abroad opportunities and much more. In other parts of the city, students report having access to almost none of this, and we use fear of pandemic learning loss to double their time in reading and math or tutoring, narrowly focused on these important but limited academic areas, and then wonder why students don't feel engaged in school or don't attend. This is why we're asking the council to fund things like $300,000 for an experiential learning micro grant program for teachers and $2 million in capital spending to build outdoor STEM learning labs in this year's budget. We are conducting our own small scale study, which involves 7 schools so far in this area on the experience gap, but the auditor's power would elevate the important area of study. We sincerely appreciate all of the work that has been done by the auditor in the past, and we know there are so many more important areas they could study and that they could take on. We know they have had unfilled roles and they feel comfortable returning some of their funding, but we do hope that they will still have the adequate capacity to carry out this important work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Interesting suggestions, and I'd not seen your testimony until just now, even if you'd submitted it earlier. Sorry for that. But the third suggestion, what would that look like? The auditor to take on the work of studying the very troubling experience gap?
So, like I said, we're doing a small scale study of this right now, school by school. Obviously, our capacity is limited compared to the capacity of the auditor. I think what it would look like, the council has had many attempts over the years to figure out what do you do about the fact that some schools get a lot of private funding and some schools don't get a lot of private funding. There's been various legislation proposed over the time, including one when David Grosser was the chair of the Education Committee that would actually physically move money. We've proposed something I think is much more moderate and reasonable of just putting money aside for an experiential learning micro grant fund. But I think what they would study is actually take a look at a representative sample of school. They have the ability to do a formal, legitimate, research-based study to look at an accurate sample of schools that have very different outside private resources and look at what the difference in student experience and student outcomes are at those schools. That could give us very good recommendations about how to close that gap. About all types of experiences that some people experience at schools because they have those private resources and what schools and students don't experience at other schools.
Thank you. I think that's the only question I have for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here in person. We'll turn to the auditor, Kathy Patterson. You were an elected official once, so you understand timing, so you walked in as you were needed. That's the way that works.
I apologize for not being here for the other public witnesses. We had hoped to be over here for that. So, shall I go ahead?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Mendelson. I believe it is still morning. I'm Kathy Patterson, District of Columbia Auditor, and I appreciate another opportunity to talk about the budget for the Office of the DC Auditor. And I also will share my perspective on the proposed FY25 budget before you and Budget Support Act and the challenges that are facing you and other policymakers. ODCA's original FY24 budget approved was 7.3 million. Our revised budget for FY24 is 9.9 million, which does include significant funds carried over from fiscal year 2023. The ability to carry over funds to a new fiscal year was approved by the council several years ago to support our increased use of contractors for audits that make use of subject matter expertise, such as our 2021 audit of the district's 911 operations. I believe the council and the district have been well served by the flexibility that we have had to contract for work across fiscal years, as shown by the use of the council of our audits on 911, on police use of force, on programs and services to address substance use disorders and other issues. You will note we have what appears to be a large reserve in our non-personal services funds due to the FY23 carryover. It's my hope that we'll use that money primarily for additional contract audits that we can finalize during the fiscal year. At issue, though, and the reason we have not yet issued such contracts is litigation we face brought by 3 sworn members of the Metropolitan Police Department. The case in DC Superior Court challenges our 2022 publication titled 36 fired MPD officers reinstated, received 14 million in back pay. 3 staff auditors and I, plus the district itself, are being sued for libel, slander, and defamation, largely based on the fact that we named names in this report on the officers who were fired and had their positions restored, though the information we used was either publicly available and or shared with us by the department. We hired outside counsel to defend ODCA, and our lawyers are taking the lead in the defense cooperation with the Office of the Attorney General. To date, we've paid out $345,000 in legal costs and are awaiting a judge's decision on our motion to dismiss the case. And that dismissal request was made on several grounds that I would summarize simply as complete lack of merit. If the case goes forward to trial, we do anticipate the cost will be significant, potentially using the bulk of our current reserve. And the issues in the case are serious. It's critical from a public policy perspective that the suit either be dismissed or won by ODCA and the district. At issue is the public's right to know what is occurring in the district government and how taxpayer dollars are spent. At issue is accountability itself. Mr. Chairman, you have taken the lead on the council in promoting accountability on the part of the police department through legislation that eliminates discipline from collective bargaining, authorizes a deputy auditor for public safety, and requires additional public reporting on key issues, including officer discipline. The litigation is a direct attack on that enhanced accountability. And we hired outside counsel with strong litigation experience because of the importance of preserving government accountability, as well as protecting the current and future exercise of the DC auditor's independence and authority. In terms of the proposal for FY25, the mayor's proposed budget for the agency includes 7.8 million and million for personal services and 1.7 for non-personal services, the largest amount of which is in the contractual services line. And again, I anticipate using that for contract audits. The proposed budget is sufficient to meet our mission. We do have unfilled positions currently, and I do plan to resume hiring once we have a clear picture of our legal costs for the year. In our budget hearing last year, I shared that we were considering a trade-off between filling additional slots, FTEs, or continuing to upgrade compensation for our current staff. We conducted comparability studies of other similar offices, including the Office of the Inspector General, and at the end of the calendar year, we provided a series of equity raises to ODCA staff. With the boost in salaries and with great flexibility in our remote work policy, I'm hopeful we will retain what has proven to be an excellent staff. And in the last 12 months, we've only had a single auditor leave ODCA. Because we are carrying 11 FTEs that are not currently filled, and given the pressures in the FY25 budget, it would make sense to give back a number of these positions, particularly given the challenges you face this budget cycle. And I do recommend that the committee reallocate a total of 6 of our unfilled FTEs for a savings of about $460,000. And if you agree, we'll share the recommended position numbers with committee staff. In terms of our space, we moved into new leased space on Pennsylvania Avenue in December 2022. Because we are continuing to permit staff to work remotely, we can work within our 8th floor space with more individuals using workstations rather than individual offices. We notify the Department of General Services that we would like to vacate our current 7th floor space, and they're reviewing that option. I expect that space will revert to other district use at some point over the next year, which would bring down our ODCA lease costs next year. I testified a year ago that we experienced a safety incident in January of 2023 when a member of my leadership team opened a glass door to her office and a rectangular metal door plate detached and fell on her head and arm. She suffered a concussion and was not able to return to work full-time until just recently. I do plan to share with the council a series of recommendations concerning the district's workers' compensation program from my perspective, not as DC auditor, but as a district agency executive and personnel authority. There's legislation pending before the council, and that offers the opportunity to weigh in with what we have learned through that experience. An initial observation I would make on the proposed Budget Support Act that is before you is that it once again disregards recommendations from our 2019 report titled "Officials Created Special Funds but Sweep Dollars for Other Purposes." The legislation would transfer more than $130 million from 103 of the district's 200 and some special purpose revenue funds into the general fund to cover costs unrelated to the statutory purposes of the special funds. Our report cited the Home Rule Act as permitting the council to create special funds from time to time and, quote, as necessary for the efficient operation of the government. The new sweeps proposed by the mayor include, for example, $4.5 million from 2 funds designed to support the Vision Zero initiative, an issue we have under review because of its priority for district residents and the frightening increases in traffic deaths. In 2019, in our report, we recommended that policymakers review whether each fund is performing as intended and to repeal those that are not necessary. If, in fact, the Budget Support Act is zeroing out half of the special funds, this might be an opportunity to repeal those funds outright, since they apparently no longer serve their intended purpose. Mr. Chairman, as you know, in last year's budget debate, this committee approved a one-time reduction in our budget for FY24 to enable a reallocation to support the Criminal Code Revision Commission. Once the budget was final a year ago, I sought to confirm that the funds were restored to the agency's budget in the out years. I learned that agency level budgets for FY25 through 28 were simply not available a year ago. I was also interested in those agency level spending projections to understand where the mayor and council anticipated major reductions to reflect the end of the one-time COVID-19 federal funding. The CFO staff was either not able or not willing to share the agency level spending projections with me. I was able to get at least part of the information from the council's budget office, which I greatly appreciated. That information included some 40 budget lines that showed projected reductions in FY25 totaling $315 million to bring the budget into balance. Again, this budget was prepared and approved by the council via spreadsheets that existed but were not published. I share this to recommend that the council return to full transparency in the district's multi-year spending plan when the FY25 budget is approved, including anticipated spending by agency by year as required in the code, and to be certain that the documents published by the CFO contain that information. In terms of the broader budget challenges that you face, this budget presents you and your colleagues with an increasingly difficult set of choices. And it's important to realize that the district spending has grown at a rate faster than revenue for years, as shown in a chart I'm attaching from the FY25 proposed budget. And the forecast for future economic activity provide no prospect for relief. The district has been sustaining a balanced budget, including using accumulated fund balances, including funds like the ballpark fund, the universal paid leave fund, and excess convention center balances. These techniques may have a legitimate place in budgeting on occasion, but depending on them is not a reliable long-term strategy. The future health of the district will depend on the ability to achieve a sustainable match between revenues and operating expenditures. Solving that equation will require action on your part to significantly reduce the rate of expenditure growth, a point that I have made previously. Part of addressing that imbalance depends on improving budget execution. Year-end figures from FY23 published in the ACFR showed a massive gulf between the initial budget of specific agencies and the amount the agency had actually spent by the end of the year, including year-end closing transfers. Together, 5 of our agencies accounted for $257 million of spending that was not included in the FY23 budget approved by this council. For example, Department of General Services had an approved budget of $380 million, but its actual spending was $425 million. The police department had an approved budget of $515 million, and its actual was $633 million. The state superintendent of schools had an approved budget of $270 million, and its actual tallied up to $322 million. With regard to the police department as an example, it's not clear today whether sustaining that department requires the $633 million in local funds spent in 23 or what it received in the approved 2024 budget of $486 million. And I note that MPD has spent well over half of its budget halfway through the fiscal year, or the $563 million that has been proposed in the new budget. This kind of volatility across multiple agencies suggests serious flaws either in budget development or budget execution, or both, the responsibility that's shared across the government. And Mr. Chairman, in 2019, you initiated a Budget Support Act subtitle to establish an expenditure commission to take a hard look at spending across district agencies and identify opportunities for cost savings and increased efficiency. I was pleased to be a named participant. But other commission members were never appointed and the subtitle was repealed. I recommend you consider reviving that proposal and do so as a council initiative if there is not ready concurrence by the executive, as you did with the Police Reform Commission. An expenditure commission could be part of an emergency version of budget legislation in order to begin the work sooner rather than later. This concludes my statement, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Give me just a. So I have some questions from you based on your statement. So I'm just going to go from beginning to end. Why have you had to hire outside counsel as opposed to being able to rely on the Attorney General to defend you from that police lawsuit?
Because we wanted as strong a litigation team as we could possibly have because of the importance of the issue. And I believe that the Office of the Attorney General has no objections to that. And in fact, they're letting our attorneys take the lead.
Are your attorneys working with the Attorney General?
Absolutely.
So this is a collaborative effort?
Yes, yes.
But nonetheless,
In the hearings that we have had to date, which have been virtual hearings, our attorney has basically done the talking for our side, but the attorneys for the Office of the Attorney General have been present as well.
And to the extent there've been pleadings, they've been collaboratively
Yes.
developed.
Yes.
That's a pretty sum, though. $345,000 has been paid to date.
Sorry?
That's a pretty sum. 345,000 has been paid to date to the attorneys.
Right. And if we go to trial, that number will grow pretty quickly.
And the effect of that is that you're therefore holding back on spending some of your NPS
Right.
dollars.
I mean, if the case continues, say through the summer and we get close to the end of the fiscal year, I'll feel comfortable with going ahead and issuing some contracts perhaps because we essentially will have additional funding in the next year's budget. So it's a matter of trying to find the right balance and be
So-
prudent with the district's money.
So when was the motion to dismiss filed? And I'm not looking for a precise date. Recently? or-
Early in the year.
So do you have a sense of when you'll get a court ruling?
I keep asking my general counsel that question, and apparently it takes a long time to write opinions. We're hoping to get the case dismissed. We're hopeful about that. But it's difficult to judge from the hearings that we've had so far.
But the next action in that case is waiting for the court's decision on the motions to dismiss
Right.
or summary judgment, whatever it is.
Yes, the next step will be either dismissing or choosing not to dismiss.
What is your remote work policy?
My remote work policy, we
Yeah.
require staff to be in the office at least a couple of days a month for staff meetings. And staff are working on projects. So they might be at an agency, they might be at a housing site, they might be somewhere as part of their audit project that they're working on. But other than that, we have great flexibility and most of my staff are working a majority of their time from home.
So it's, when you say a couple days, you mean literally 2 days a month?
Literally 2 days, yes, a month. Or 1 day a pay period, however you want to count it.
Do you know whether any of your employees have moved out of the region?
We currently have 2 employees who were hired living outside of the region. And we have a 3rd employee who sought permission to move out of the region and was given that permission and has a current plan to move back in a 2-year time period.
They're moving back because that was part of the deal? Or,
That was part of our understanding. The 2 individuals that we hired, knowing they were living outside the district, are veteran district government employees who bring a wealth of experience to our office. And this made sense to me. One was prior to the pandemic, the other was during the pandemic. And I think that the district and taxpayers are well served by their service, even though they don't live within the DMV.
give me a second here. So if I understand your statement correctly, you have 11 vacant positions.
Yes,
And the impression I have is that you have used some of those savings to increase salaries.
yes.
To be competitive. Is what is left the 6 unfilled FTEs that you're offering to give up?
It's not, the math isn't quite that simple. What I would suggest doing is essentially giving back, if you will, a number of FTEs that, and when I did a tally, it came up to something like $460,000. So they were individuals who, they're positions that are at the lower end of our salary scale, not the higher end of our salary scale. Because when we do, if we are able to do some hiring, I would want to be paying competitive wages.
So if you give back 6, and you said you would give us the position numbers. If you
Yes.
gave back 6, you would still have 5. But
5
if you're
FTEs.
using, yes, but you're using some of the PS money to pay increased salaries. So that means you would not fill the 5,
Correct.
right? At least I'm understanding that. Space. So you would like to vacate the 7th floor, but the budget reflects you're paying rent for the 7th floor. Am I
Correct.
correct? Do you expect that DGS will reallocate that space sometime this fiscal year?
That's certainly my hope. I think the last word we had from the DGS representatives was maybe by the end of the calendar year, they would have a plan for the space. But I haven't heard from them recently. That's something I need to follow up on.
So isn't there an adjustment that we could make in the budget for rent?
If that happens, absolutely. But again, it would be an adjustment that DGS would make, as you know.
No, I don't know. I mean, I know, but I don't know. So, well, we have the budget before us now.
No, I-
So the likelihood of the 7th floor space no longer being occupied by you in fiscal year 25, summer, all of the fiscal year, is high. The likelihood that it won't be occupied by you is high.
That's
But-
certainly my hope.
But we're budgeting as if you are occupying it.
That's correct, because again, we're waiting. It's not something that we can handle independently of the Department of General Services. Although I have not researched that issue, perhaps I could sublet it. I don't know. Maybe I'll have my general counsel take a look at that.
Well, I wasn't asking you to sublet it. I was thinking that.
It is right across the street. Perhaps you have offices that would like to use it.
Don't tempt, members may be listening. That's roughly, the 7th floor is roughly 1/3 of your space. If you have 14,000 square feet and 4,000 is the 7th floor,
Yes,
that's roughly 1/3. And I wouldn't mind being able to take 1/3 of the $791,000 for some other purpose. Perhaps you could talk to DGS,
we will. We'll follow up.
see if we can adjust this. You're about to get whispered. If you want to say anything more,
Excuse me?
if you want to say anything more.
I'm reminded that we do have a 4th employee who is living outside the DC through a waiver. And I'm happy to show more information on that.
Outside of DC or outside of the area?
Outside of DC, outside of the area.
You also said you plan to share with the council a series of recommendations concerning the workers' compensation program for district employees. There is a subtitle in the BSA dealing with the district's worker compensation program. I don't remember offhand what it does. If you have recommendations, I don't know if they should be freestanding legislation or incorporated in that subtitle. So
I'll
you-
take a look at the subtitle, but I believe the subtitle is not relevant to some of the issues that we'll be raising. But from my understanding of the legislation that I think Councilmember Bonds introduced, it is somewhat more sweeping. And if there are hearings on that legislation, then perhaps that would be an opportunity for us to provide some of our perspectives.
So you'll look at the BSA subtitle, but you think that the separate bill pending in the Executive Administration Labor Committee is the better way to go?
Yes.
I'm following the order of your testimony, so we're going to get to some of the better stuff. I did not understand this regarding the budget transparency section of your testimony. Recommend that the council return to full transparency in the district's multi-year spending plan when the FY 2025 budget is approved, including anticipated spending by agency by year, FY 26 through FY 28, and be certain that the documents published by the OCFO contain that information. So we adopt what we adopt, which is a financial plan and there's supporting documentation. It's probably a lot of spreadsheets. That's not good enough?
The example that I started with was my desire to make sure that the roughly $500,000 taken out of our budget for this current fiscal year was restored in the next fiscal year. And I tried to find documentation of that. There was no published documentation that showed ODCA's budget for FY25.
Now, you said no published, but you did say you got some information from our budget office.
Right, I tried continuously to get the information from the CFO's shop and was unable to do so. But I finally got some spreadsheets from the council's budget director, which did include agency numbers for the out years. My point being, though, my own reading of the code in terms of the budget, what goes to the Hill, what is published, that the financial plan, I believe, should use, and I believe formerly did include agency level spending figures for each of the out years in the financial plan.
So the issue is not what the council has, it's what the CFO is publishing.
Right.
And
And I'm not sure how broadly the documents that the budget committee, budget office shared with me, I'm not sure how broadly those are shared even within the council. I'm just not sure. It may be that each of you had the out year budgets for your agencies, but I was not able to, it took me a while to find them.
okay, but again, it's that you think the CFO should publish
Absolutely.
so that when one looks at the financial plan, they could turn the page and see for the DC auditor, it's I want to come up with close to the right number. It's 7,500,000. And you look at Department of Transportation and it's X
Right.
number of dollars and you
But
see,
that it's included for each of the years of the financial plan
yeah.
by agency.
On page 6 of your statement, you detail 5 agencies. I want to understand that a little better. So we could pick any one of the agencies. Let's pick MPD. So the approved budget was obviously the approved budget. We approved $515 million. Now, there would have been a revised budget with the supplemental. Does the approved column reflect the revised budget?
Right, these are the numbers that the actual is what was included in the annual comprehensive financial review.
The actual, but I'm talking about the approved column.
Right,
Does the approved column, is that the May vote by the council or the revised budget after reprogrammings and any supplemental?
I believe that's from the book that is considered, the book that is published that is the congressional submission. So what was approved by the council, signed by the mayor.
Okay, because there are adjustments that are made. So right now we have a supplemental budget for FY24. I don't know MPD offhand, but it may increase MPD's budget by $20 million.
Yeah, it's certainly possible.
And that would be revised. And so, but that also would be higher than what you have in the approved column.
If what you're saying is correct, yes.
And I'm pretty sure that most of the agencies, maybe not the auditor, but these big agencies get some adjustment. Also with MPD, there's federal funding, the Emergency Planning and Security Fund, which is appropriated by Congress outside of our budget. And that could be additional money.
Right, and it's possible that MPD has essentially offloaded some of their local expenditures to that fund. That is certainly a possibility. I believe they do that each year.
That's right. This is local funds only. So then how would you account for this additional spending? I gave you a couple of options. One is the supplemental budget. Another is reprogramming.
There are a lot of transfers that are made in month 13 that are included in the act for where the fiscal year is over, but an agency gets additional funding through moving the money around in what is known as month 13 in November after the end of the fiscal year, before the act is finalized.
Why wouldn't that be violating the anti-deficiency statute?
I assume because it's done as part of the year-end accounting. So that it would only be anti-deficient if it weren't in the act, if somehow or other it wasn't reflected there. But it's a good question from the standpoint of, I think, the intent of the Anti-Deficiency Act. I think the intent of the Anti-Deficiency Act is not to have an agency double its budget during the course of a fiscal year.
True. And I will share my own frustration, which is why we had the board review of anti-deficiency violations, BRADV.
Which meets, I believe, once every 10 years or so.
I think you might be exaggerating, it might be once every 15 years. Actually, the story I've heard is that since the council made an appointment to it, it hasn't met. What is frustrating to me is that an agency gets a budget, let's say, of $100 million. They're overspending $110 million. That's the total. They get a reprogramming. Now their budget's 110 million. Well, they no longer overspent.
Right.
And that's missing the point of the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is that you're not supposed to overspend. I don't know how to stop that, though, other than I think Bradby could be more aggressive.
I can tell you one of the things that I did as your predecessor as judiciary chair, because as you know, those agencies do have a tendency to overspend. I would have regular meetings with the agency fiscal officers, with the CFO staff, with the corrections or MPD or whoever it might be, whenever the financial review process report showed an overspending or showed that if spending at the current level, there would be overspending by the end of the fiscal year. And we would have these conversations and the question would be, what are you going to do to rein in those costs? And that's something that I did on a pretty regular basis.
And
So there is that kind of activity that the council can engage in.
And did it rein in the costs? You're making me remember a long time back, but my recollection is some of the agencies still overspend. MPD overtime, corrections, population, they still overspend. So, no, I get that there's a value to that oversight, but it doesn't, I'm challenging whether it really changes the behavior.
I think it very often did change behavior because I think there was a recognition that as the committee chair, I had some say over their budget for the following year. And so talking about what kinds of steps could be taken to rein in, whether it's overtime or whatever it might be, I think that I do believe it had an effect at least at the time. That was my impression.
So let me ask you on the expenditure commission. To give just a little more detail to what you testified, we authorized this in 2019, as I recall, and I made the appointments from the council. It's the same structure as the Tax Revision Commission, roughly 5 members appointed by the council, 5 members appointed by the mayor. The mayor never made her appointments. We funded it. We hired an executive director. I appointed a chair, and the mayor did not cooperate. I think she saw this as an attack on her spending. When I saw it very differently, which is we have a lot of duplicative or overlapping programs, and maybe we could look at these overlapping programs with an eye toward which ones really aren't very effective and to what extent can they be combined and how do we get more efficient. That's the way I saw it. In any event, the pandemic hit. And with a $1.5 billion drop in our revenues over 2 years, in the revenue estimates, it didn't make sense to be at that time looking at expenditures, especially when half the commission wasn't appointed. That's a long way of giving background. How do we set it up going forward if the mayor doesn't want to participate?
my recommendation would be to do some kind of a blend of the provision that you enacted in 2019 and the Police Reform Commission, and perhaps have it structured so that the group begins meeting on a date certain with or without the mayor's appointees, so that you're certainly inviting the mayor to participate. And in this current budget climate, it may be a completely different situation from the executive's perspective. They may wish to participate, but if they don't, I would move forward with the council, with the CFO, with maybe include some independent agencies. But if there's not a mayoral participation, I think it doesn't mean it's any less necessary of an exercise to do.
If there's not mayoral participation, there might be an issue with access to documents.
Not if you have the CFO participating.
You think that would be sufficient?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we will get back to you on the two issues that you've raised.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next agency is the Office of Budget and Planning. I think it's the Office of Budget and Planning. That's what my witness list says. I don't think we'll be that long. I have two witnesses before I get to Eric Kennedy. Hillary Kay, she's returned, and Eric Goulet, who has returned.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I have to submit my written testimony. You moved so quickly through the previous agencies. It's still on my laptop here, so I'll print it out and then submit it electronically for you.
Okay,
But it is completed.
good. I have the witness list order Hillary Kay's first and then you, if that's okay.
That's fine. Perfect.
I'm actually happy to let Mr. Goulet go ahead of me if that works for you, Chairman Mendelson.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I'm sorry, I'm going to try to connect on a different device if you would like to let Mr. Goulet go ahead of me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, okay. All right, that's a plan. Mr. Goulet?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and council staff. My name is Eric Goulet, Ward 3 representative for the DC State Board of Education. Today, I will be testifying in my individual capacity as a board member and not on behalf of the board. I support the fiscal year 2025 budget request for the CFO's Office of Budget and Planning of 6.7 million and 47.5 FTEs. As I testified at the performance oversight hearing, I'm extremely impressed by the performance of this office under the leadership of Eric Kennedy. OBP continues to deliver transparent and accurate budget documents under a very tight timeline that could be improved significantly if council made the annual budget submission date 5 weeks later. While I was delighted to hear your commitment to fully fund our DC public schools at the recent Ward 3 Democrats meeting, I was very alarmed to hear you state that you were going to submit a budget to Congress that our independent CFO might not be able to certify as fiscally sound. I support your position. I support the position of our CFO to require that DC repay the locally mandated reserve accounts, which were created by DC Council Chairman Vince Gray, and require those to be repaid within the financial plan. I might feel differently about this matter if the council had not been spending so much in an unrestrained manner in recent years. In just one fiscal year, the DC's cash on hand plummeted by 15% during a fiscal year where revenue increased. I was extremely concerned that Councilmember Louis George moved an amendment to divert $59.6 million of FY23 end of year revenue away from the reserve refund requirements, keep SNAP at the federal level for one more year, and to pay excluded workers, including sex workers, for purported pandemic losses of income. That was $20 million. I was equally concerned that when Mayor Bowser asked to meet with the council to seek permission to wisely delay these payouts because of the upcoming fiscal cliff, your response, Mr. Chairman, was to threaten a lawsuit. I'm a fervent supporter of Vince Gray's Birth to Three for All DC Act, and I was devastated to see the $63.5 million for the pay equity fund eliminated in the proposed budget. Had council not diverted funds, 94% of the pay equity fund could still have been in place for FY25, funded with just a $3.9 million cut. While the pay equity fund should be fully restored, it shouldn't be done by threatening DC's cash flow and bond ratings. Refusing to repay reserves doesn't provide recurring funding for the pay equity fund. There are many programs within human services and housing where DC's benefits far exceed Maryland and Virginia and could be reduced slightly to balance the budget responsibly to restore the pay equity fund. Also, deliberately sending a DC budget to a Republican-controlled House that the federally mandated CFO has refused to certify as fiscally sound is asking for trouble and will needlessly open the door to unnecessary congressional meddling in DC's budget. This creates the same concern as when you decided to override the mayor's veto and send the revised Criminal Code Act to a Republican-controlled House during a DC crime crisis, resulting in RCCA being overturned on a bipartisan basis. But in this case, we risk budget autonomy or even home rule by providing an opening to those eager to mess with DC. I have seen the statement issued by Attorney General Brian Schwab, and I disagree with his assessment. Budget certification is merely an expanded form of a legally required fiscal impact statement, which are within the CFO's sole authority for permanent legislation. Regardless of our interpretation of this, more importantly will be whether a Republican-controlled House is willing to accept an approved DC Local Budget Act that our CFO will not certify. Without the fiscal year 25 budget before Congress, the Republican-controlled House could write the DC CFO who reports to Congress and order him not to spend any funds beginning on October 1st, 2024, because a valid budget was never submitted. If DC CFO does not believe he has the authority to pay DC payroll after October 1, this automatically by federal statute, as you know, triggers the return of the Federal Control Board, which was never repealed but remains dormant. Mr. Chairman, repaying DC's reserves, ensuring our city has adequate liquidity, maintaining our AAA bond ratings, and making expenditure reductions to restore the pay equity fund is the responsible and prudent thing to do. Sending an uncertified DC budget to a Republican House is extremely risky and merely delays hard but necessary choices. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today, Mr. Chairman, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Goulet. Hillary Kay.
Good morning. Thank you. I hope you can hear me a little bit better now.
So far, yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, DC Council Chairman and Committee of the Whole, Chairman Mendelson, Committee Council members and staff. My name is Hillary Kaxer, a lifelong resident. I'm an actor, educator, and advocate in the district, and grateful to testify before you today for this budget oversight hearing about an issue specifically related to the function of the DC Council and the Office of Budget and Planning, because the issue is related to many agencies under the purview of multiple DC Council committees, and therefore relevant to intercession and coordination by the entire council and the Office of Budget and Planning. The behavioral health diagnosis defined as hoarding disorder, HOARDING, hoarding disorder, or HD, represents a DC Department of Behavioral Health severe service gap and unmet need for early intervention that costs FEMS, Adult Protective Services, Medicaid, and all district residents, both in dollars and in life and limb. Because of the truly interagency and intercommittee nature of this issue, you, the entire DC Council and the Office of Budget and Planning, along with the executive branch, hopefully can and will facilitate interagency collaboration to address our severe unmet need NHD behavioral health service gap that directly affects public safety, public health, Medicaid, APS, FEMS, and quality of life for district residents. This year, more than ever, we're looking to save money. You, the committee of the whole overseeing the Office of Budget and Planning, and you, the entire DC Council, by filling this egregious service gap in one agency, you can save significant DC taxpayer money across the DC government. So many witnesses are asking for you not to cut and to give more money to programs. This testimony proposes an actual significant cost saving. I'm asking for a modest investment, $50,000 to train stakeholders, but that small investment will offset significantly higher cost savings across the DC government. You today are considering how to budget for the DC Office of Budget and Planning. So please put relatively little money, more money into having the DC Office of Budget and Planning coordinate between all the disparate agencies and committees of the DC Council involved in trying to make a small investment now to generate a large payoff. I've testified before multiple committees of this council with a purview of even more numerous different agencies, but you can take action through you, the committee of the whole, and the Office of Budget and Planning with an ounce of prevention to render great weight and lots of pounds of dollars worth of cure across agencies. But it will require the Office of Budget and Planning to work together with the rest of the city government to budget and to plan for disparate agencies of the executive branch to work together to realize these savings. I've testified before the Committee on Health. I've testified before the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety. I've testified before the Committee on Executive Administration and Labor. FEMS street calls mobile integrative health teams sometimes do home visits to assess living conditions and better understand, I just lost my place, conditions and needs of people who they are trying to help. Team encounters with someone who may have hoarding disorder are shared with the DC Office of the Fire Marshal, who then contacts DBH, who typically make a referral to Adult Protective Services. If the living situation presents an imminent safety risk, the DC Office of the Fire Marshal contacts the Department of Buildings to evaluate if the living space can continue to be occupied. Where is the Department of Behavioral Health in all this about a behavioral health diagnosis? Where is the budget and planning of DC's Office of Budget and Planning? Washington Post article in the written testimony, National Geographic says 1 in 40 people in the US has a hoarding disorder. Containing a fire in a home where hoarding is an issue can take twice as many firefighters and twice the time. People are put in guardianship and nursing home care because their behavioral health condition has gone untreated for so long, not to mention life and limb of our first responders. Please urge the Office of Budget and Planning to budget a small allocation to plan for a way to get DBH to spend $50,000 on training stakeholders. And if you and they do that, you and they will render significant savings as improving quality of life for districts across the for residents across the district and save lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I appreciate your suggestion that the Office of Budget and Planning has a role in this, but the decision of where to put money is actually a policy decision, and that's made by the mayor or by the council, not by the Office of Budget and Planning. They execute the budget. They ensure that the budget is balanced. I trust that you've testified before the Committee on Health?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because they have primary responsibility for the issue of behavioral health in the Department of Behavioral Health.
If I may, I've testified before that committee for about a decade, for as long as the diagnosis has been defined, before two different council chair people over that committee. So I'm
Yes.
looking to get broader agency collaboration, which is why I testified earlier today. But as far as the DC Council, can the Committee on the Whole and the DC Council do anything, or is it just back to the executive?
The correct answer is that the budget is appropriated by the council, so the council could do something, but we tend to follow the lead of our committees, and in this case, that would be the Committee on Health. you said you testified there, you might reach out to the committee staff as well and talk with them.
Yes, they are very responsive, but I'm afraid that I haven't seen any results yet.
Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with your testifying before other committees or reaching out to other members.
Thank you for
Um,
your time this morning.
Thank you. Mr. Goulet, was it a policy choice for the council to establish two additional reserve funds, additional to what the Home Rule Act requires?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So then if the council wanted to repeal the two funds, it could do that.
If the council chose to repeal the two funds, I think what would have to then be assessed is what the collateral consequences of that would be, such as changes to your debt service payments, changes to your bond ratings. I mean, that could impact the debt cap capacity. I mean, it could set off a trigger of consequences.
Some of that's an exaggeration.
Well,
Why would it affect that compared to 12%?
Well, I mean, if our borrowing rates for out years were to increase because our bond ratings dipped, I mean, I think that's very likely that we could lose capacity in the capital plan in that case. I mean, we would still be within the 12%, but the amount we could borrow within that 12% would be less because we'd be paying more in debt service.
Well, you could run that scenario with almost any decision that the council makes.
Well, and I think that's why, we trust our CFO to run that calculation and then,
Okay,
tell
but-
us what it is.
But you could run that scenario with any policy decision on the part of the council.
Yes.
Okay. The CFO's role includes the CFO has authority to make policy decisions?
The way I view it is the CFO reacts to policy decisions that are made by the council and then costs those out.
Okay.
They don't make policy decisions in and of themselves, only to state that if you do something.
Let me
there's the
rephrase the
cost.
question. So does the CFO under the statute have the authority to make policy decisions? I didn't ask to evaluate. I said to
But by
make policy
a
decisions.
policy decision, you mean stating like what you must do to reach a balanced budget? I would say no.
I didn't know to set up the reserve funds. Could the CFO require us to set up reserve?
They did not. No, sir.
Okay, because that's a policy decision.
It is.
Okay. The council, former Chairman Vince Gray was the chair of the council who moved the legislation to set up the two funds.
That's correct, sir.
You were working for him at the time.
I was budget director for.
So
him, yes.
you had a hand in if you did not actually author the legislation for the two reserve funds.
I did author it in consultation with OCFO at the time.
Yes, okay. Oh, so it was a collaborative effort. Okay. And the statute prescribes how the funds are filled?
Yes,
Okay. You remember what that is?
I do.
What is it?
So at the end of any fiscal year, any funds that are undesignated, then repay the fund 50/50. That was up until, I believe, last year when the council changed that to divert the 59.6 million
Yeah,
away
actually,
from
the
the
legislation,
repayment.
the legislation you authored didn't, I don't think covered the 50/50. That came later.
No, it's supposed to repay the two funds equally. So
Oh,
it pays
yes,
the
okay.
fiscal stabilization reserve fund and the cash flow reserve fund 50/50. We may have subsequently altered that to repay them in proportion. I'm
No.
not sure.
No,
Okay.
no, I misunderstood. There's another 50/50, but that comes later in the water.
You're thinking of the PAYGO and the
Correct.
issue with the Housing Production Trust Fund.
Correct. So, so the legislation that you authored that the council adopted says that the funds are filled or replenished out of the year-end surplus.
Correct.
Okay, so now the decision to fund put $100 million more into the Department of Human Services or to not put $100 million more into the Department of Human Services or to put $100 million more into Department of Transportation or not to. Those are policy decisions that the council makes as part of the appropriation process, correct?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, it was hard, but the answer was yes.
Yes,
Thank
it
you.
is.
Okay,
Well, I think it's
So-
hard because there's, like, let's say you have a spending pressure that within DHS, for example.
well, we don't have spending pressures when we're appropriating.
Correct, yeah. So in that way, but you would have to then make offsetting choices should you choose not to fund it. So in a way, it's a choice.
Well,
but you're
that's-
bound by kind of the
Policy
reality.
decisions are making choices and offsetting choices,
It
right?
is, and that
So-
is the full purview of the council to be able to do that.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you said full purview of the council.
It is, yes.
Yeah. So then it's a policy choice that we take $200 million and we put it into a reserve fund outside of the replenishment statute or to put it somewhere else. That's a policy choice
If you take it, to put it into the reserves or take it out, I'm sorry.
to put it in.
To put it in would be a policy choice, yes.
Okay. Now, I was struck by your view of the Attorney General's opinion. You kind of dismissed it as a statement. You realized it wasn't a statement.
No, I haven't read the full opinion. I've read a statement on it. I'll be glad to read the full opinion.
Okay.
I mean, I am
It is an
familiar-
opinion. It's an official opinion.
No, I mean, that's, I mean, that's fine. I mean, I think the bigger concern,
Don't say that's fine. You worked at the council. You do understand the difference between an official opinion and anything else that comes out of the Attorney General's office.
yeah, and again, you know, my concern is not what our Attorney General is saying on this. It's going to be what we send this up to Congress, what their interpretation of federal law is with the CFO. And if they interpret it that you've submitted a budget that's not valid and they won't accept it, it's not going to matter what our Attorney General has said on that matter.
Well, it's true that Congress can act in a political way. But with regard to the law, I mean, the law says what the law says. Says we have 4 reserve funds, 2 were set up by the council. That's the law. I don't propose that we repeal the 2 locally established reserve funds. I think that would be a mistake. Not because of Congress, but because I think for financial responsibility, it would be a mistake. But that still, the law would permit us to repeal them just as it permitted us to create them.
Yes and no. So I would say, yes, you could do that, but then the CFO would then have to cost out what the consequences of that would be within the financial plan.
Oh, sure.
And that's what I believe is happening here, which is why I think I'm very alarmed that they're
No, the
saying
CFO is
the
instructing,
budget is not sound,
the
basically.
CFO is instructing the mayor and the council how to spend dollars, saying that there has to be $200 million put into a reserve fund rather than spent on a different program. But I'm not going to go back over that.
Okay.
I don't have any other questions for you.
Thank you.
You said you're going to give me the statement in writing.
I absolutely will, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for your time today, and I'll see you at the Budget Support Act.
Thank you. Eric Kennedy would be the next witness. Thank you, Hillary Kay. Thank you, Mr. Goulet. And I believe Eric Kennedy is remote, and I believe he is remote because, oh. Because he was unable to come in today. Mr. Kennedy, we're waiting for you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and members of the Committee of the Whole. I am Eric Kennedy, Deputy Chief Financial Officer for the Office of Budget and Planning in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. I am here today to testify in support of the Office of Budget and Planning's fiscal year 2025 budget requests. With me today is Sherry Greenfield, Associate Chief Financial Officer. I will cover the following areas in my remarks: OBP's fiscal year 2025 budget requests, fiscal year 2024 accomplishments to date, and fiscal year 2025 key program initiatives. The fiscal year 2025 operating budget request for OBP is $6.713 million and 47.5 full-time equivalents or FTEs, which represents a net increase of about 77,000 from the fiscal year FY 2024 approved budget of $6.636 million and 47.5 FTEs. I will now discuss some of our recent accomplishments and our plans for the remainder of the fiscal year 2024 and for fiscal year 2025. During the fiscal year 2025 budget formulation process, OBP and OCFO financial staff worked together to produce several key budget products, which I will briefly review. The interim budget application, or IBA, OBP staff members worked diligently with the OCFO's Office of the Chief Information Officer to sunset the budget formulation application, which was the district's legacy budget formulation application. In place of the BFA, an interim budget system was developed in a staggered rollout between October 23rd and February 2024, and was used to develop the 2025 mayor's proposed budget. IBA will also be used to develop the district's 2025 approved budget. The current service funding level, or CSFL, as part of the fiscal year 2025 budget development, we created the CSFL and published it on February 28th, 2024. This document provides an analysis of the local funds only cost of operating district agencies in FY 2025, without consideration of any new policy decisions beyond the FY 2024 budget. OBP collaborated with other OCFO staff, the Office of Budget and Performance Management, and the agency program staff members to develop the mayor's proposed fiscal year 2025 budget and financial plan, which was submitted to the council on April 3rd, 2024. OBP continues to work with other OCFO team members to improve the interagency budget process. This process enables the agency providing services, the seller agency, to finance the cost of those services by directly charging interagency project funded within the budget of the agencies receiving the services, the buyer agency. OBP has significantly improved the transparency of the interagency process by including 2 interagency reports in the fiscal year 2025 budget. These reports provide additional insight into the interagency process. OBP continues to manage the Spending Pressure Task Force by working closely with the OCFO clusters and OBPM teams to vet and quickly identify potential gap closing solutions for potential spending pressures. We continue to use the JIRA application to track reprogrammings and other critical budget adjustment requests from initial submission through final approval. Additionally, OBP successfully launched the district's grants application system, DGAS, which is an OBP web-based application used to manage the transmission, workflow, and reporting of requests for the approval of increase and or decrease of grant budget authority. A few benefits of this system are improved transparency and streamlined process for submitting and tracking agency grant requests, expanded access to OCFO agency staff to access and track the progress of requests at any stage of the approved workflow and generate status reports, and real-time email notifications of the OCFO agency staff when OBP posts comments as the requests are being promoted through the stages of the workflow. OBP collaborated with the mayor's budget staff, agency program staff, and OCFO financial staff to develop the mayor's fiscal year 2025 through fiscal year 2030 capital budget requests. We also work closely with the Office of Finance and Treasury on multiple borrowing plan scenarios that were applied in the debt model to ensure that the district stayed within the 12% debt cap throughout the 6-year capital improvement plan. My office also worked with the Office of Revenue and Analysis to ensure balanced funding in the capital improvement program, or CIP, projects that are funded with local, special purpose, and federal funds, such as gas tax receipts and right-of-way fees. The Capital Assets Replacement Schedule System, or CARS, was utilized during the capital budget formulation for the mayor's proposed budget for the evaluation of facilities and for the replacement schedule for fleet vehicles across the district, as well as scoring the capital projects. CARS currently contains 100% of the district's owned assets, totaling more than 316,000 individual assets, including over 5,000 vehicles. CARS was utilized to assess the viability of including medium and heavy-duty alternative energy vehicles in the district's overall fleet portfolio, as well as providing feedback on the district's support towards the cost of long-term capital needs, including restoration and repair of 42 separate housing complexes owned by the District of Columbia Housing Authority, which includes over 6,400 individual family units. The results of this physical need assessment of the 42 complexes have been uploaded and maintained in CARS. OBP also produced a variety of reports that are available on the CFO's website, which include capital budgeting reprogramming activity, quarterly capital budget spending, and the district's Department of Transportation reconciliation reallocation efforts. We collaborate with the Office of Finance and Treasury on the formulation and management of the budget for various debt service agencies and with the Office of Financial Operations and Systems on fiscal year and closing transfers that occur between the operating and the capital budgets. Some of our key programs for FY25 are as follows. Incorporate lessons learned from the fiscal year 2025 budget development process, continue to improve the FRP procedures and manage the spending pressure task force to foster cooperation and collaboration between the OCFO and OBPM in order to identify potential spending pressures early and develop gap closing plans that tap all the resources available to the district. Continue to make enhancements to the CIP with further analysis of the operating budget effects from completed capital projects and monitoring of the capital fund balance, and continue to lead the support and use of CARS. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, we look forward to working collaboratively with the council during the development of the district's fiscal year 2025 approved budget. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my remarks. I would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I want to ask you about the diffs, and in particular, I think it's the budget module. Isn't that what we discussed a year ago? And the council added $15 million to the capital budget for this?
Yes.
I'm a little bit confused when I look at the capital budget. It, I think, speaks of the entire project, the entire diffs project. You would know better. It says the allotments have totaled $183 million. The balance right now is 21 million. I think that's the balance after spending as well as encumbrances as well as pre-encumbrances. Did I say 21,000, 21 million? And there's 5 million for FY25. Is this adequate for you to complete the budget module?
Yes, we believe so.
And this is no additional funding beyond what we appropriated last year?
That's correct.
And where will we be a year from now with this project?
So as you are aware, there's of the 15 million, 5 of the 15 million, I'm sorry, my glasses are crooked. 5 of the 15 million is in FY 2025.
Yeah.
And so we've started working on the diffs version of the budget system. We've started assembling committees, and we've started project plans. And our hope is to begin to roll out parts of the system as parallel testing in 2025 and actually for the 2026 formulation process as a parallel testing project. And then in 2027, we hope to be using diffs completely.
I'm making a note. Give me a second.
And we'll keep you updated to our progress.
So a year from now, literally a year from now, the council will have received the budget from the mayor. The diffs budget module will be tested in the formulation of that budget.
So not
You
the
said
full,
parallel testing
right, not
for
the
the
full,
FY26 formulation.
that's correct. Not the full budget system because 5 million is in 2025. Yeah.
Yeah, well, 2025 is, you could spend it all in October. You could. when you appear before me next year, ideally, you will say you need no more money. And you will say that it was tested and looks like it's working pretty well. And you will say, we're switching over to the DIF's budget module entirely for FY27.
That's the goal.
Are you confident that goal will be met?
Yes.
Give me a second. You mentioned in your testimony at the bottom of page 5 that operational goals for FY 2025 include, quote, incorporate lessons learned from the fiscal year 2025 budget development process, unquote, which coincidentally is one of the questions I had prepared for you for this hearing. What are some of the lessons learned?
Well, we haven't completed the year yet, so I'd only be able to give you lessons learned from the mayor's proposed. I would prefer to give you the final lessons learned, which would incorporate what we learned from working with your team.
Well, I sort of would prefer getting some preliminary sense of lessons learned.
I mean, I think the one that we have talked about a great deal is that we have to have 10 days after pencils go down in order for us to do our due diligence and provide what we think is a quality product. I think one of the other key lessons learned is, as you are aware, this is the first time in the history of the district where the supplemental budget was actually completed in the budget system. And one key lesson we learned is that a lot of times there are entries that aren't necessarily relevant to when we pass that supplemental budget over to your office. There are some entries that don't necessarily need to go. This is getting in the weeds, and they can be confusing. And so we've learned in working with your budget staff over the last few weeks that before next year when we send them over, we'll do it a little differently.
So this year, the schedule was that the budget be submitted to the council on March 20th. And backing up, because there's a requirement with regard to public education, DCPS schools had to be notified roughly around February 8th. The revenue estimates came out February 29th. Pencils down was supposed to be March 10th for submission on March 20th. We've gotten some testimony that this ought to be delayed. I can't remember, I'll say 5 weeks. What's your view of that?
So I don't necessarily have an opinion other than to say OBP needs 10 days. If I give you my opinion would be based on what I've heard some of the people say on the executive side, that they don't have enough time between when revenue estimates come and pencils down. But you know, if I give him my 10 days and that's within your deadline for having the budget submitted, that will happen.
I do have to say, as chairman of the council, I think the 10 days is unreasonably long. It just is unreasonably long. Well, I think that the council, your office need to, and the mayor's office of budget needs to look at this schedule. We set the March 20th date because that's pretty close to what it's been every year. And I'm not quite sure why, but this year it didn't work. And I think we need to revisit this schedule. While I'm on the issue of timing, We get a quarterly report on contingency draws. That comes out of your office, doesn't it?
Yes,
And we seem to get it about 3 months after the end of the quarter.
last year we had some problems delivering it in a timely manner. And I think at my oversight hearing, I had said to you that I believe we fixed those issues. And so I don't anticipate seeing that kind of performance again this year.
So when should we be getting these reports?
So those reports, I don't know the exact dates after the quarter ends. So if you want a schedule, I can get you something, but I don't know off the top of my head.
You don't
exact
remember off the
dates.
top of your head whether we'll get the quarterly reports within the month after the quarter?
No, yes, you should get it within the month after the quarter. But I thought you were asking for specific dates.
No,
Because I don't
wasn't
know.
asking-
Yeah, because I actually asked 2 days ago, are there dates in this? Do we have statutory dates, or is it we do the report, not just that report, other reports? Because I signed off on some reports yesterday, and then we simply deliver the reports, or do we need to go back and create some type of schedule and share it with whomever we send these reports to? So it's a timely question because I just asked that a couple of days ago.
All right. Well, I'm at the moment, as I'm sitting here, I'm not asking you for specific dates. Is a month longer than it needs to be? Can you do it within 2 weeks of the quarter?
No,
3 weeks?
I would say a month is adequate.
All right, what about the FRPs? They're called FRPs, right?
Right,
And that's also quarterly and that's
That's
for each
quarterly.
agency?
right.
Now, I've seen significant delays or even the non-existence of the FRPs, as in there's an FRP, but nobody can find it. How soon should those be available?
So we actually have a schedule for those, and I can give you that schedule, but we get the FRPs, we being OBP, we review the FRPs, and to the extent we're comfortable with what the FRPs say, we, within 24 hours after we review them, we post them to the auditor's website, or we post them for access by the auditor, the council, and the mayor, or the mayor's people.
Well, what's the deadline for you getting the FRP? So the FRP comes from the agency fiscal officer?
That's correct.
So what's his or her deadline?
I have specific dates. I don't know them off the top of my head. I can send that to you.
Well, again, I'm not looking for specific dates because if it's April 3rd this
So
year.
let's say it's the second week after the end of each quarter. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but that sounds about right.
And then do you have a deadline for how long you take to review it?
Normally we try to review everything when we get it, we want to get everything reviewed within a week, no more than 2. But each time we review one and we're okay with it, we post it 24 hours after we complete our review.
Well, if you don't like it, why is it to my benefit that you are not releasing it? Why don't you release it and then require the AFO to come up with a revised one? And then
Well,
post
if
that?
we release something that doesn't have, not that this happens, I can't recall this happening, but if we release something and there are some inaccuracies, that's problematic.
I would agree, but if, I'll just pick an agency, if the council is overspending its budget and the FRP reflects that, because that's what the FRPs look at, and you're kind of concerned, you don't like because the FRP includes also the plan for correcting the spending, correcting the overspending.
Mhm.
You don't like that plan, so you send it back, and meanwhile, everybody's in the dark as to what's going on. And I
It's a
think
pretty quick turnaround if we have to send something back. We don't send it back and say, get it back to me when you can. Our goal, we're looking at this in broad strokes. our goal is from the time that we get a FRP delivered, our goal is to get it to you within 30 days of getting it. That factors in if there are FRPs that we have to send back and ask for changes. So yeah, we don't.
Yeah,
and-
I'm going to be
and-
honest with you. I don't like that. So the different council committees have oversight over different agencies. There's an agency that I didn't like using the council as an example because the council wants to review this. Let's say the OCFO is overspending. The FRP reports that it's overspending. As the oversight chair for OCFO, I want to see, and it's the third quarter. It's June 30th. I don't want to find out at the end of August.
You
or
wouldn't
even
find
in
out
the
at the end of
middle
August. If it's June 30th, you'd find out in July.
I think I'm trying to impress more urgency.
Well, if you recall, we revamped our FRP process about 5 years ago because it was a relatively fast turnaround. And I believe we got a correspondent from the auditor, DC auditor, about, I think it was DCPS, about information not being complete. And when we looked at the process, what we realized was we had to build in a reasonable amount of time for review. We had to build in some time for things that are incorrect, potentially, and that we had to fix, that we would have time to fix them. And hence, we came up with a new process.
But an important part of this, there are two important aspects. One is identifying that the agency is overspending. And the
Mhm.
second is seeing what the agency's correction plan is.
Yes.
And the longer everyone has to wait to see that, the less usefulness it is. So an agency's overspending,
Mhm.
and chances are, maybe I shouldn't put it quite that probable, but it's not unusual that an agency that's overspending doesn't have good control over its financial management. And so we kind of want to know that right away and see the adequacy or inadequacy of its plan. And if that's just not available for weeks, especially as we're farther into the fiscal year, that's a problem.
Yeah.
I could put it differently. Fixing things in real time is much, much, much better than waiting a month afterwards.
Well, remember that we do have, I talked about this in my testimony, we have the spending pressure task force. And so we're fixing things in real time. We're addressing things in real time. You're getting a report, likely my office has already identified issues prior to you getting that report. And we've started working on those issues. And when you get the report is a way of telling, obviously, folks outside of my office, OCFO, and the agency what's going on. That's the purpose of the report. So turning it around, in the event I gave you the process. Highly unlikely that you go 30 days without seeing the major FRPs. I don't believe that happens.
All right, so if I asked you, can I get the FRP for DCPS today?
For which quarter?
The quarter that ended 25 days ago.
The second quarter? Yeah.
What about the third quarter?
Third quarter would just be starting.
Oh, you're right. The second quarter, yes.
Okay, I would have to check with my staff. Sometimes we give extensions because the agency can't get it done in the time frame. I don't recall giving DCPS an extension, but we do sometimes have to give extensions.
I hope you see I'm a little frustrated here.
I do.
I would like to see the FRP for DCPS. How about the FRP for Department of Human Services? Is that available?
I can't answer that off the top of my head.
Okay. How about as follow-up? You endeavor to send me those FRPs today. Department of Human Services and DCPS.
Well, if I can send it to you if it hasn't been submitted or reviewed.
Yes, I
So,
understand. And today's
right.
April 25th, and I'm pressing you on timeliness. And maybe I shouldn't say timeliness, on urgency. And this is my test, is to see if you can produce
If it's,
DCPS.
again,
And-
it has to have been submitted and it has to have been reviewed. So I can't force the agency, and I'm not saying they haven't submitted. I don't know sitting here right now.
Well, we'll
I
find
don't
out.
know.
We'll
Yeah.
find out. So
Yes,
you'll
we'll
send me
find
an email this afternoon that will either
Yes.
attach the two FRPs or tell me where they are in the process.
I can do that. I can do that within an hour of this hearing ending.
That'll make me very happy. Any other questions? On that happy note, I don't have any other questions for you.
Okay. I do want to tell you one thing. The auditor was talking about the financial plan by agency. We did publish it this year, just so you know. It's in volume 6 of the budget book. We plan to put it in volume 1 for the council's district's approved budget, but it is in there.
This would be the by agency for the mayor's proposed budget.
That's correct.
Yes,
And-
and then when we adopt the final financial plan, that will be reflected instead, and that would be, you say, will be in volume 1?
It'll go in volume 1. We put it in volume 6 because it was a last minute decision on my part to put it, and that was the best. That's the only thing we could do at the time, but it'll be in volume 1 when the district publishes approved budget.
Okay, great.
Okay, Thank
I
you.
think we're good for the moment. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
okay. Right.
I'm going to turn now to New Columbia Statehood Commission. I have exactly 3 witnesses. Paul Strauss, U.S. Senator, Michael Brown, U.S. Senator, and Oye Owolayo, who is the representative. And I believe Senator Brown is online,
I am. Thank
and
you.
Mr. Owolayo is not here.
He had to work.
That's a respectable endeavor.
Mhm.
It would help if you turned on your microphone.
Are you
I'm
talking? to
sorry, if
me?
the senator wanted to testify first as a.
Oh, it's, no,
civilian to
you,
the agency.
please go, Senator, please.
Okay, Angela, if you could, I think it'd be all right under the circumstances if our friend also joined us up here, if he's gonna be good there. Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson, members of the Committee of the Whole. I'm Paul Strauss. I'm the senior elected United States Senator for the District of Columbia. I'm here to give testimony on behalf of the New Columbia Statehood Commission. In accordance with Section 2.3 of the Commission's bylaws, it is my pleasure to present the proposed budget for the New Columbia Statehood Commission fiscal year 2025. The proposed FY 2024 budget under the jurisdiction of the New Columbia Statehood Commission is $266,833, consisting of 162 for personnel services assigned to the Office of Statehood Delegation and 105,000 in non-personnel services to fund statehood initiatives subject to allocation by the New Columbia Statehood Commission. The FY 2025 statehood initiatives budget is essentially unchanged from that. I think there is a fraction of a percentage point of $90 that was moved from one section of the budget to another at the request of the budget office. The commission's budget submitted to the council by the executive reflects essentially no change. All revenue sources are with local appropriated or donated funds. Consistent with the current federal appropriation statute, no federal funds are allocated towards statehood initiatives. In addition to the appropriated funds, the new Columbia Statehood Commission has the authority to allocate donated funds to enhance or supplement programs which require additional support, as well as to provide discretionary funds subject to the limitations of DC Code Section 1-129.32. Funds budgeted by the new Columbia Statehood Commission are designed for the purposes of educating, advocating for, promoting, and advancing the proposition of statehood and voting rights for the District of Columbia to district residents, and taking that message to the citizens of the 50 United States, and additionally protesting our lack of voting rights to the international community. The commission members, including the mayor, yourself, and delegation members have been raising the issue in the national media as well as international media. We expect that the commission will maintain funding for successful initiatives such as the 51-star celebrity endorsement program, as well as continued support for activities and travel to targeted states by delegation members. The statutory structure of the commission requires that funding for statehood initiatives be reviewed by the full membership of the new Columbia Statehood Commission, who is required to approve a spending plan on an annual basis. This spending plan has historically represented a consensus of the commissioners and is designed to promote unity of operations and a centralized communication messaging in support of the district's admission as the 51st state, full self-determination for the District of Columbia. The spending plan provides funding and staffing for the delegation's unified shared office in the Wilson Building and a unitary staff under the commission, managed, of course, by our executive director, who is here with me today. While some in the delegation have, on occasion, expressed a desire to see the commission function more like the DC Council, with individual separate offices, separate personal staff to support the political objectives of each member, the current legal and budget structure does not provide for this. Additionally, the need for unity of messaging and working towards common objectives has never been more important in the current environment of home rule attacks. Additionally, the commission's centralized funding structure puts a focus on specific statehood initiatives, which must be subjected to an annual review process to determine their effectiveness and focus. The efforts of the commission, our congressional delegation, and the DC statehood movement have seen much progress over the past year, particularly in reducing the effectiveness of congressional attacks on home rule, which, although they have continued to originate in certain select committees of the U.S. House of Representatives, have either been successfully defeated in the full House or stalled in the United States Senate. We look forward to continuing to establish innovative ways to reach out to concerned people and advocate more strongly for DC statehood. And I think given the modest investment of public funds that we get, we are getting very good returns for the people of DC. Attached to my testimony is a copy of the testimony that we provided at the performance hearing on our successful statehood initiatives, as well as the budget book printout. I'm prepared to answer questions regarding the new Columbia Statehood Commission budget. Before I conclude, though, I do want to thank my colleague on the screen, Senator Michael Brown, for his many, many years of service as a member of the commission and an important part of our agency. I suspect that these hearings in the future just won't be the same without you, Mike, but I appreciate all you've done for the people of DC. Thank you.
If you want, Senator Strauss, we could schedule another budget hearing so then you can have him back at the next one. Senator Brown, do you have a statement?
Yes, I do, and I'm sorry that I'm not there in person, Mr. Chairman, because this seems to be my last budget hearing, and I wanted to come, but you moved too quick for an old guy, and I got caught in another meeting this morning, so I'm sorry. I'm coming to you remotely so that I didn't miss the opportunity. I come before you today to testify about the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. I refuse to sign off on the current financial plan because, as usual, It is sorely inadequate and needs serious adjustment to meet the most basic needs of delegation. Although we have noted this in our last several meetings, the budget plan again ignores the basic staffing needs for the delegation by providing only 2 FTE positions, although we're 3 separate offices. This leaves our United States representative with no support staff. This is unacceptable. In addition, there's $87,000 allocated for other services, which has never been approved. At the very least, some of this money needs to be reallocated and adjustments need to be made to provide additional staffing. Also, there's more than $350,000 that has been donated by taxpayers directly to the delegation, which has not been distributed. And I point out that we're still in April, so we haven't counted this year's tax returns fully yet. Obviously, the taxpayers care more about statehood than the DC Council. Until we can have a frank discussion about these issues, I will not agree to the 2025 budget, although I understand that my acceptance is not required. That being said, since this was my last official appearance at a budget oversight hearing, I feel compelled to offer insights of my 18 years on the budgeting for our delegation. For the first 9 years, there was no money, none. I paid for everything out of my own pocket, $50,000 for which I've never been reimbursed. The last 9 years have seen anemic funding, again reflected in the latest budget, which is smaller than that allocated in 2022. Even though more than 80% of the voters have agreed to statehood and have created the office in which I serve, the council refuses to step up to the plate. On my weekly podcast, both Ralph Nader and Walter Smith, former director of DC Appleseed, stated in separate appearances that a minimum of $10 million a year would be required for a potentially successful statehood campaign. I state this for the record, as I know it falls on deaf ears falls on deaf ears before the council. Less than $500,000 a year to make DC a state is not a priority. $500 million a year to keep the hockey team in town is a priority. Since I have no vested interest in the funding beyond this current year, this is my dying declaration. It's time for the city to step up to the plate. As we lament the shortfalls created by the pandemic and wrangle with shrinking budgets, we can't ignore the over $1 billion a year we lose due to lack of statehood. As crime is off the hook in DC, last night 5 people were shot in the district. A 5-year-old girl was shot the night before. 2 13-year-olds and a 12-year-old girl are charged with murder for kicking a man to death in an alley just to watch him die. A 14-year-old shot an NFL running back. A congressman was carjacked, and another was assaulted in the lobby of her apartment, and the list goes on. Meanwhile, we ignore the control that statehood would give us over our own legal system. Instead, we send a crime reform bill to Congress, reducing the penalties for serious crimes and alienating 44 Democrats and the President of the United States. Let me state this emphatically. The biggest obstacle in my attempt to gain support for DC statehood over the last 18 years has been the DC Council. The council has decimated our offices. They have taken away the salaries, removed us from the Constitution for the first time in 200 years of the Tennessee Plan, even though we helped write it, won't allow us matching funds to run for election, and consistently degrades us by not allowing us to fulfill our mandate and not even officially referring to us by our proper title. We're often called shadow senators by the council themselves in official documents. In spite of this, I've tried my hardest. I got statehood put back in the National Democratic platform, have created a successful DC statehood podcast for the last 11 years, gotten co-signers in the Senate for our statehood bill, meeting face-to-face with Republicans, independents, and Democratic senators. traveled to 17 states and 3 foreign countries to speak on statehood issues, and have dozens of opinion pieces published in national publications, 22 alone in the Washington Post. I even have a billboard in my front yard annoying my neighbors while proclaiming our indentured servitude to all those crossing the DC line on Massachusetts Avenue, and worked with the lottery office to create a statehood scratch-off that has raised more than $1 million for the DC General Fund. I've done everything I can think of, and for the past 15 years have done nothing else but this job. I've had no other job. It's time to step up to the plate and provide the support our delegation requires. It is no coincidence that DC is the place that the Tennessee plan has failed, even though it has been successful when it was used by 6 other jurisdictions. Other senators were paid, they were funded, they were respected, and until that is the case in the district, our delegation will not be able to accomplish that for which we have been elected. My time is almost done. To quote the bard, I have suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and I'm taking arms against the sea of troubles by opposing them and ending them. But I want my legacy to be that I stood for this office and what it was supposed to be. I don't care that you were never able to get over the fact, Mr. Chairman, that I ran against you and scared you, or that the mayor feels the need to be rude to me in public for my attempts to speak truth to power. I care only about statehood, and it's time that the council care about it too. Thank you.
Interesting testimony, and if you want to preserve for the record, you need to submit it.
It's being submitted. Karen has copies of it. She'll give it to you.
Okay, great. And I want to say thank you for reminding me that you ran against me a decade and a half ago because I'd forgotten. I can't speak to the mayor. I do want to say this only because it's important that the narrative is correct. There was a statement that crime has gone up. Yes, crime was up substantially last year, and the level of crime today is unacceptable. However, I'm looking at this morning's crime report from MPD. Homicides year-to-date compared to last year-to-date, homicides are down 24%. Assault with a dangerous weapon is down 31%. Robbery is down 22%. Violent crime overall is down 24%. Burglary is down 21%. Motor vehicle theft is down 30%. Theft from auto is down 21%. And arson is down 50%. Property crime overall is down 13%. All crime total is down 14%. Do I think these numbers are acceptable? No. Do I think the district government could be doing much more? Yes. But one of the challenges that this government has, particularly with regard to the Republicans in the House, who realize that crime is a great issue to demagogue against Democrats across the country, is to play into the narrative that crime continues to increase when it is, in fact, not increasing. That is today's crime report. If you want, I'll be happy to email it to you, Mr.
Well, you know what, Mr. Chairman? That's great, but let me give you a little advice as a politician. When you've got 2 13-year-old girls and a 12-year-old girl on trial for kicking a man to death so they could take a video, this
It's
is
horrible.
time to stand
It's
up there
horrible.
and quote crime
It's horrible.
statistics. And the
It's
people
horrible.
who should have known
But it
better
doesn't do any good to
and
spread the
Bill O'Reilly.
narrative.
You
It
know
doesn't
what
do
I-
any good to spread an exaggerated narrative. So let me ask you a couple of questions. Senator Strauss or Senator Brown, has the commission approved this fiscal year's budget?
Yes, the FY 2024 fiscal year budget was approved
Yes,
by the commission at the last meeting.
Not
Okay.
2025.
Not that, obviously, the fiscal year 2025 budget is not ready to be approved as a spending plan because it's still a
Correct.
draft budget before the
Correct.
council.
With regard to the proposed budget, the top line budget number remains identical to last year. However, the FTE count went down from 3 to 2. Can you explain that?
We currently have 2 full-time employees employed by the agency. When we need additional support, we've been using other resources, but that's the current, that number reflects the current number. The personnel budget has remained the same. And so I was never sure how that number was put in. You know, please understand that the budget book itself is prepared by different agencies through a different process. We're consulted in it. But this certainly reflects the personnel expenditures and the number of positions.
I ask this every year. I feel a little bit like Senator Brown saying things for the record. Is there a mapped out plan for how the strategies to achieve statehood?
The plan continues to be to engage directly with Congress on the Hill when we need to engage in the 50 states, particularly those targeted states where they are represented by members, particularly on the Democratic side of the aisle that don't support statehood, and to engage with the international community as well as efforts in the media. That is the plan. That is the strategy. The problem is that the playing field changes with each national election. And so our plan for next year in 2025 will go one of two ways. We may have a trifecta of a sympathetic president, a sympathetic majority in the Senate, and a majority that controls the House of Representatives. That plan would allow us to move our statehood bill forward, perhaps with an extraordinary opportunity that we may not have seen. That plan could be subject to change. We may have an unsympathetic president in the White House. We may lose the majority of supporters that we have in the Senate. We may or may not be able to regain control of the House with a majority of statehood supporters. In which case, we are back on defense, and largely our efforts will be focused on preserving the home rule that we have until we can get either a massive ideological shift within the group of politicians that generally opposes statehood, and have them see that it's really a very conservative value because we're shrinking the federal bureaucracy, we're promoting state rights. There's a lot about statehood that is not antithetical to so-called conservative ideals. Allowing the admission of new states, for example, by a simple majority vote of Congress is exactly what the framers envisioned when they wrote the Constitution. So there's even an originalist argument. But the state of right-wing politics is something that I certainly don't feel an expert to comment on. But we know that we'll be facing very different realities depending on what happens in this election. I do know that we will be taking our message to both the Republican and the Democratic conventions, and we're not writing off any one side or another. But we've all been at this long enough to understand the political realities.
You know, I've got to tell you, Mr. Chairman, despite my colleague, who I appreciate, who served even longer than I have, his eloquent explanation, this is the first time I've ever heard of a plan. There's no plan that I've ever been involved in other than whatever plans I make. We don't move in the same direction. We're separate offices. We should be treated like council offices. We were never envisioned to be separate offices. This delegation that we have predates any city council in America. It goes back to the 1700s. And many times the mayor has stood and proclaimed that we used the Tennessee plan. And the Tennessee plan was about separate offices. It wasn't about people moving forward in one direction, rowing in the same boat. And that's what it should be. That's what the voters want.
What should it be? Separate offices or rowing in the same boat?
$350,000 you keep of our money. It was given to us so that we could all pursue our own separate interests. Senator Strauss and I have not talked since the last time we sat in front of you. We don't work together. That's not how it works. Any more than you consult with council members to decide what you're going to do on a daily basis. We don't do that either. And I've got nothing to gain by this. I just want you to take care of the next person, pay the next person, fund the next person.
Well, you know my view on this. There ought to be a plan, to use the phrase that was used a couple
You
minutes
can't have a
ago,
plan if you don't have money,
to,
Bill.
to generate a ideological shift. And if there
You
was more
don't-
of a,
You can't have a plan if you don't have a budget. That's what we're here today to discuss. We don't have a budget. We have enough money to pay for 2 FTEs, my radio show, which I paid for the first 6 years, and a handful of other little things. We can't have a plan because Ralph Nader and our friends at DC Appleseed told us we needed $10 million, and you're giving us $200,000. What are we supposed to plan? You know?
well, oftentimes a plan will define what the budget should be. The plan comes first and then the budget. But let's not go
Yeah,
back and
what's
forth
the
on this.
plan for the $500,000, $500 million to keep the hockey team in town? Phil, do the math. $500 million for the hockey team, 1% of that for statehood. How the hell can you stand up there and call it a priority? It's sad.
Thank you, Senator.
Anyway.
Give me a second here. I don't have any other questions for you. Senator Brown, thank you. Senator Strauss, thank you. And thank you for being here, as
Yeah,
well as the personnel from the commission.
And thank you for being here. As I was coming here, I began to think about this a little bit, and I saw it in a different light. You know, today you started this hearing with your own official of the council. There's nothing you couldn't have gained at this hearing that you couldn't have had in a private conversation with her, but you had a public accountability process to show that this is an open and transparent process. And I think it's important to be here because those of us who use public funds, whether they're big budgets, small budgets, owe the people of the District of Columbia to participate in an accountable and transparent process. And I do appreciate the opportunity to be here today, even if not every one of my facial expressions may have adequately conveyed that sentiment.
No, I understand that. I accept that. Thank you, Senator Strauss. That's going to conclude this hearing. The Committee of the Whole has one more hearing on agency budgets scheduled for tomorrow, starting at 9 a.m. The DC Retirement Board, other post-employment benefits program, and the Commission on the Arts and Humanities. The time is 12:40 in the afternoon, and this hearing is adjourned.